In this part of the tutorial, we are going to look at documentation. Previously, we discussed how to create the building model that you see on the screen, this two-story family house. We use two-dimensional data, line work, we turn it into a 3D model. But this time, it's going to be less about modeling and more about creating data, requesting data from this model. By documentation, we mean creating sections, elevations, quantity takeoffs, list, detailing, annotations, text, all the kind of things that you would eventually put onto a plot layout and print or save into a PDF. So that's what we are learning now, how to create documentation of this model. The first block of documentation will be sections. We are going to cut this model in two and create images and line work out of this model. Now, before we actually do that, just with everything else, we are going to predefine the settings for the section tool as well. We already know how to do that. If you go to the documentation tab, you click on this drop-down menu, you have the ability to predefine the sections. Now, there's a bunch of settings here, so let's make sense of that. First of all, you can decide onto which layer the section line is going to be put, because the section is actually put up by two things. One is going to be a two-dimensional symbol, which is going to be a line, and the other entity for the section is actually the section. So the two things go hand in hand, but you have to decide where the line itself as a 2D symbol would be positioned. So I'm not satisfied with this layer setting, so I'm going to make sure that the section line is going to be stored on a certain layer. You can choose any layer you want. I'm going to use the text layer. I don't know which one that is, so I'm just going to hit a T to jump into the layer name starting with T, and I'm just going to use the plain text layer. Next, you can define how the line will actually look like. You can define the line weight, the color, the line type, so you can use any kind of settings over here. I'm going to use it as it is. You can also define the symbols at the end of the section line to each end. In every country this is different, so you might need to disable that, but where we are, you have to have the section symbol on each end of the line. You can also define the text style. I'm going to use it as it is. Now, the things that you have to keep an eye on is where you want the section line to be shown, because this is going to be a 2D symbol, so it has to belong to one of the floors. Now, I'm going to position the section line on the ground floor, but I'm going to keep this setting on, because that would make sure that the section line would be visible on all floors. So no matter where you are navigating between the floors, you are going to see the line all the time. Now let's move on to representation in 3D. This is where the fun starts. This is where you define how the section will look like. Now the first setting is the representation mode, and here you have three options. Now you can decide if you want to have a vector drawing, which is going to be line work, or you want to have any of the two image and snapshot options. Now, for now, we are going to use image. Now, images and drawings have certain strong points. If you are using images, then you are going to have materials, textures, and the result would behave like an image. While if you are looking for a CAD output, then you might want to use the vector drawing. We are going to use both of them, so I'm going to illustrate both of them, but first we start with images. Now, then you can decide on the visual style, how you want the result to look like. Now, this is familiar to you if you have watched the previous session when we looked at the 3D settings. So you can define all kinds of visual styles. For now, we are going to use consistent color with wireframe, because that would give us a very nice defined lines plus materials and textures. So let's use that one. Okay, we have upper and lower limits for the section. So if you want to set like a crop region for your section, then this is what you have to set up. I'm not going to do that now, but this is where you can do that. Now, again, there's not going to be a cropped region, and the grid lines would be, if I would have any grid lines, then I need to enable them. It doesn't matter what you choose now, because there are no grid lines. But the partial section is something you have to keep an eye on. Now, this is important because if you have a larger model with many surrounding buildings and things around your model, then you might want to ignore them. So you just want to make a partial section. If you don't check this box, then the software would take the whole model and cut everything into For now, I'm going to click on this because later on I'm going to have more things around my building, and I don't want to keep cutting them because that would take up too much processing time. So I'm just going to keep it as it. I'm enabling this option. Level annotation lines. What are these? These are actually the designators for the floor. So next to your sections, you would have markers for basement, ground floor, first, second floor, etc. So you might need to add that symbol at the end of the annotation lines. Now, this is something that you can enable. For now, we are not going to do that. But what we have to keep an eye on is all kinds of settings over here. Now, hiding objects is very useful if you have many certain things downloaded maybe from the 3D warehouse. In our case, we have something over here, the solar panels. So if you don't want to keep cutting them, again, think about processing power, then you might need to disable that. So enable that to hide them. But if you want the solar panels to be on your section, then you can just disable this. I'm going to keep it as it is. I don't want to keep on featuring these things. Later on, I can do that on the details, but on the sections, I don't really need them. Now, markers is something we have to look at, and this is something where you can define how your section looks like in your country. Now, if I enable that, I have a setting option over here, and I can click on that to see what is the current setting for the section line symbol. Now, this is what I'm going to use now. Later on, I'm going to show you how to create a similar one with variables, which you can fill out. But if you're using a different standard in your country, you can just click on replace and find another one on the library, or you can just create your own. As I said, later on, I'm going to show that. I'm going to use the one which is right here. So the other settings you can fine tune, but for now, I'm satisfied with the results. So I'm just going to hit OK. So let's get to it. Let's create the first section. So I'm going to choose the 2D, put it into focus, and I want to have one section which is going to be like a horizontally oriented one, which is going to cut the stair in this level. So what do? I click on section again, and I need to pick a starting point and an end point for my section. So I'm going to click over here and drag my mouse until I find the desired ending point, which would be, let's say, here. Next thing I have to define is a direction from which I'm looking at the section. So you can look from this side or that side. For now, we are going to look from the right to the left. So I'm going to use this direction. It doesn't matter how long you are dragging this for now because we didn't enable the cropping region. So let's just hit OK. And then the software thinks for a second and gives us a section like this. Now, because this is an image, then you have all the materials and you also have the hatch patterns. One cool thing about the sections in ARCHLine is that if you hover the mouse over them, you see this pre-selection blue lines, which means that if you click on something, you see that this is not really a drawing element. This is the actual element on your drawing. So if you click on things, you can see that this is not just like a two-dimensional drawing, but this is actually referred back to the model, which means that the model and the section is in living relationship between each other. So if you do any kind of change on your floor plan, you can retrace those changes back to the section. More of that later on. Now, so I have one section right here, and I'm going to create another one, which is going to be this kind of vertical section, cutting the staircase in another way. So in order to do that, I could place the same kind of section, but I'm not going to. I'm going to use a different kind of representation style, which is going to be line work. So again, going back to documentation section settings, I use the same sections, but instead this time of using the image representation mode, I'm going to use vector drawing. Now, when it comes to vector drawing, you can again fine tune the visual style. Now I have less settings. Hidden line, wireframe, shaded with textures, etc. I'm going to now use the default hidden line and just hit OK. And it's time to position another section. Now, I want to have a section which goes through as many interesting details as possible. So probably this window, the staircase, and the entrance door. So again, I go to section, start, find a starting point, right? Like here. and start dragging the mouse over the staircase. Again, if you want to snap to a like vertical or orthogonal mode, then you can just hit the shift key, and that would help you get there. So keep pressing shift and click on the ending point, and then again you have to define on the direction from where you're looking at the section. I'm going to drag it all the way here, so I'm going to look from the left to the right. So I'm just going to click, and then the section is created. Now, what is the difference between this section and the other one we just created? Well, this one is a line work. So this is actually a CAD drawing, could be saved into a CAD drawing, but if you click on it, you see that it's also the real thing. So if you click on any of the elements, you can retrace your drawing back to its original components. So we are going to talk about later how to create some more details, because if I look at the section, I see that the layers are quite, you know, conceptual. So I only have one double layer wall and I have a single layer slab, and I want to have some more interaction between the layers, which I'm going to do later on. But if you do it later on, you don't have to keep on creating the section all over and over again, because every time you do a change, as you are going to see later on, the section will update and reflect your changes. We discussed before that the section lines are in living connection with the sections that they create. Now let's illustrate in action what that actually means. So if I go to the floor plan, I see that I have denied section lines over here, and if I click that, I see that this is the line based on which this section was created. Now, what happens if I want to include some additional details on this section? For example, this double door part, I want to include this in the section line. So what I have to do, I click on the line itself, and I click on it again to bring up this menu, because after all, the section lines are nothing but 2D lines or polylines, so you can do whatever you want with them. So just click Insert Node, and let's add a node over here. And from now on, the two parts of the section line are broken into two, actually, and you can just click on any of the parts and you can move them, you can offset them. So if I click Offset, I can just move the line over here, snap it to the middle of the double door, and by hitting Enter, the software asks me if I want to update the previously created section, which I do, and if I do that, the section will now include the double door as well. So this way you can update your section line, and based on that, the section itself will be regenerated in seconds. I mentioned before that when you're creating sections in ARCHLine, you would have not only the lines but also the hatch patterns. An interesting question though is what makes this hatch pattern look like the way it is? So in case I want to change this hatch pattern to something else, where can I do it? Now, the easiest way to find the origin of this pattern is to just click on the entity itself, which in this case is a slab. So let's go to the slab settings, and we already know this dialog, because previously when we set up the slab in terms of thickness and materials, this is where we did it. But now we have to go deeper. We have to go to slab layers to have access to this thing over here, which is the material of the slabs inside. So for now, I see that this slab only has one single layer. That's fine for us, because what we want to have is this thing over here, the reinforced concrete. We want to see where its settings lie. So if I click on the material itself, I see that this is the option where I could actually potentially change this material to something else. I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to go deeper in the settings of this reinforced concrete material, which I can do by clicking on the cogwheel up here and clicking on Edit Material, because this is the dialog where you can actually find all the properties of the material, including the physical properties, which is the actual repetition. So if you want to stretch this material, or you want to give it a different pattern of repetition, you can do that here. There are appearances for rendering, and there are thermal parameters, etc., etc. But what we are interested in now is the hatch on section, because this is where you can set up how this material would look like here. So first of all, you can decide if you want to show the hatch pattern or not, and you can decide on the hatch spacing and dash length, and also the angling. But where is the material? I mean, the hatch pattern is coming from. It's coming from here. So you have, if you want to replace the hatch pattern, you can just click on this thing over here, and here you have a list of material hatch patterns where you can find the one that you're looking for. I'm not going to change it, but in case you are in any kind of situation ever where you want to change the hatch pattern for a certain material, then this is where you can find the setting. Our project gets a little crowded at this point, so we need to reorganize the drawing surface. Let's see how we can do that. So first of all, let's click on the floor plan. And I want to keep this floor plan in focus, and I want to see the other things that I created, the 2 sections and the 3D model here next to it. So I'm just going to click on this button over here with this magnify. You can reorganize the drawing surface. So you have all the drawings at your fingertips, and the one in focus is going to be here. Now, let's go to the ground floor, which I can do by the page up, page down keys, or with the up and down keys over here. So let's go down. And I still see the residue of the DWG drawing I imported, which I don't really need. So I'm going to now disable the visibility of the original DWG because I don't need to see this part. Later on, I'm going to turn it back on, but for now, I don't need them. We already know how to do the switching off of layers. There are many surfaces for that, but the one I like to use is here at the layer walk. So the best way to do it is just find all the parts which says Elata Nova, because that was the name of the original drawing. So just deselect the parts that you don't need, like that. And here we go. So just hit OK, and now you have only the created model, 3D model in focus. Now that we disable the DWG, we are going to keep on going with the documentation, and the topic that we are going to talk about now is geolocation and north direction. This would be very important because later on I'm going to create some elevation drawings with shadows. I want to make sure that the shadows are accurate, so for that I need to define where the model is on the globe. And also I need to define the north direction, so the program would be able to calculate where the sun is shining from. So in order to define the geolocation, there are certain settings for that, but the best place to find it is if you go to File, you go to the option called BIM, and you go to Project Parameters, which is something that we have to talk about anyway, because this is where you can define things regarding the name of the project, maybe the one who consigned the project with you. But the thing that we are going to talk about now is the project location up here. If you click on it, you have several choices to define where the project actually is on the globe. You can use city from a predefined list. You can set the north direction, but what I'm going to do now is use Google Maps to find the project's original location. And if I click on that, there's going to be a plugin appearing, which is a Google Maps plugin, and here you can find the origin of the project. For now, the default origin, because of my geolocation, is going to be in Hungary, but I want to move this to somewhere else. I need to type in either the GPS coordinates, or you can find the actual address, which I have like right here. So I'm going to just type in Carmel Avenue, which is in El Cerrito in California. Let's hit enter, and then the software finds me the original place. Let's just zoom in, which I can do with this button over here. And I don't really see the vacant lot I'm looking for, so I'm just going to click on satellite. Reason this is Hungarian is because my system is Hungarian, but if you open it in English or in German, then you would see it in the right language. So let's just move to where we want this project to be. It's going to be here on this vacant lot, so I'm just going to click on the marker and move it where it is. Now, an interesting question is that, okay, I'm going to place the marker, but what is the marker belonging to? Because this is a larger project, so what is the place of insertion? I'm going to show you that in a second, so I'm just going to move it like here. Let's move the window. And you see this thing over here next to the project. This is my project origin. This is the insertion point based on which it's going to be inserted into any kind of location. So if I hit OK, then I see a certain set of GPS coordinates appearing in the project parameters, and these coordinates are actually holding the position of this point on the globe. So this is where you can position your project on this plan of ours. So let's just hit OK. Now the position is fine, but the north direction is still not defined. Well, actually it is, because by default it's going to be up north like this. But we have to change that. So there are two choices to do that. You can either do it based on a typed in value, or you can just grab onto this dial and move it under, you hit the right angle. This should be 42 degrees. You can again either just do it like this or just type in 42, and that way just hit OK. The project is now accurately positioned in terms of its geolocation, GPS coordinates, and also in terms of the north direction. So having cleared that out, I can be sure that if I create renderings, shaded elevations, the shadows will be accurate. Let's now discuss elevations. How are they created? Previously we defined the geolocation, so I expect that my elevations would have nice accurate shadows. But how do we create them? Now, elevations work a bit similar and they are stored in a similar place than sections. There are some differences, there are some similarities, so let's investigate them. Again, if you click on this drop-down menu, you can predefine how your elevation would look like. Let's do that. First of all, I need to change the layer onto which the elevations to this symbol is stored. By default, I don't really like, so I'm just going to click the drop down and again use the text layer. It's the same layer to where I stored the section symbols as well. The line weights, draw orders, I'm not going to change. The representation mode, I'm going to keep as image with hidden line. And also the only thing I'm going to not change but just look at is the elevation symbol, which is stored here as a setting. So if you want to change this symbol to something else, you can just click on the replace button and replace it, or you can just create your own symbol. More of that later on. So let's hit OK again. Nothing is created yet. The way elevations are created, you are not going to draw polylines like the way you would do with sections. Instead, you are going to generate the elevations from here. So if you want to get, for example, a west elevation, just click on that and the software gives you a nice elevation like this. Again, let's click on elevation, and I need to have a northern one, and I think I need a southern elevation as well. So if I create all these things, again, I have a lot of different drawings. So if I need to reorganize my drawing plane, then I'm just going to click on this magnify window, and then all the drawings are at my fingertips. You can see that there are certain elevation markers. Again, just like with sections, these are in living connection with the drawing itself. So let's see how we can modify the elevations. Let's see, I have this west elevation and I want to turn it into a, let's say, a shaded elevation with textures. How do I do that? First of all, I need to make sure that this elevation over here has textures on it, which I can do by clicking on the elevation marker and going into settings. Now, the representation mode you can't change, but the visual style you can. So if you hit this drop down menu, you can say that this elevation should be a consistent color one with wireframe. And if you do that, hit OK, the software asks you, do you want to update this elevation? This is the one we are talking about, by the way. So let's just hit OK. And then if I do, then let's just put it into focus. I have a very nice textured elevation, but this still doesn't have shadows on it. So let's investigate how do we add the shadows. Now, before I do that, let's talk about what the elevation actually is. This is nothing more than a 3D model in a certain view, which means that the same rules of representation apply to this. What this means that if you now go to the View tab and you click on Shadows, you have the ability to turn on and off the shadows on this seemingly 2D drawing. It's not a 2D drawing, of course. This is a 3D model. So whatever you do here in the shadows, it would have effect on your elevations as well. Okay, now we have the shadows on, but what happens if I don't want to show my model in this particular time of the day? I want to change it to another time. I want to move the shadows. How do I do that? For that, I have the shadow simulation tool, which allows me to either drag this little sun icon to where I want, or just drag the sliders to define a certain time of the year and time of the day, so that way I can find the best possible result for representing shadows on my elevation. Let's hit OK. And now this elevation is good to go. It could be going on for documentation. Let's see what else we can do with the elevations. There's a mistake I have to amend. Namely that I have a basement level, but I don't really have a basement, so I don't need this annotation line. Now, this annotation line is here because logically speaking, this project does have a basement, only that it doesn't have any content on it. So if I select the floor plan itself, and if I go to the floor manager, I see that there's a basement. I don't need that, so I'm just going to hit this button to delete it. And when you delete it, you might need to go back to your sections and elevations to update the change. So making sure that this line would just disappear. You don't need that. So there are more than one ways to implement changes like that one. One way to do it is that you manually go back to the section or elevation and just select the items that you don't need, namely this line, for example, and you just, select the view that you don't need. I mean, select the view that you do need, but select the lines, the elements that you don't need, and get rid of it like that. There's one way to do it. The other way to do it is that you just go back to the origin of these elevations and sections and ask the software to refresh these views. That's what I'm doing now. So I know that there's a north elevation over here. Let's assume that I don't know where the marker is. If I want to track the view back to its origin, then I just click on the header of the view, and I'm just going to ask the software to show on floor plan the original position of this view. And once I have it, I can just go to the properties and I can just hit OK, which would regenerate the elevation, getting rid of the unnecessary parts because it updates the view. So again, I just click on this thing over here. I'm going to ask the software to show on floor plan the item that I need and just hit OK again, and that way you update all the views that you don't need. Now, but that was just a sidetrack. The actual thing that we want to do is to ask the software to use a different kind of representation on one of our elevations. So let's see how that's done. What I want to do now, I want to take this southern elevation and give it a different representation style with this kind of technical drawing kind of look with some shadows on it. There are more than one ways to do it. So one way to approach this issue is to turn the image into a vectorial drawing. Now, one way to do it is that you go back to the floor plan and generate a different elevation. That's one way to approach this. But you can also click on the header of this view and say that you want to turn this from image to vector drawing. So you just click on it and now it's again turned from an image to a vector drawing version. The representation style I'm not really fond of, so I'm just going to hit this button over here and I'm just going to say that I want this to be shown with hidden line removal. So the result looks the same as before, but instead of having an image version of an elevation, I have a vector drawing. Now, why is this useful? This is because I can ask the software to actually draw shadows for me. Now, let's see how that's done. If I go back to this navigation toolbar, I click on the second button over here, I can ask the software to use shadows with contour lines and with hatches on this drawing. And also I can say that instead of sun shadows, I want to have elevation shadows, and I hit OK. And the software ends up actually drawing a technical shadow on my elevation drawing. It takes a while because the software actually calculates the lines and draws them for me. So instead of having an image now, I have a vector drawing for further documentation. Let's discuss how to extract a certain detail out of your drawings, because for further documentation sometimes you need to call out something, and for that we have a tool of the same name. It's called a callout. So what we are going to do, we are going to take this section over here and we are going to look for a point of interest, which would be this part over here, which we want to extract. Now, the good thing about callouts is that you can not only refer back to the original drawing, a tiny part of that drawing, but if at any time your model changes, the changes will be updated, of course, on the callout. So you don't have to do that. You don't have to redraw and regenerate everything. Let's see how callouts work. If you go to documentation callout, first we start with the settings, of course. And first we could take care of the layers. Now currently this callout would be done on the text dash annotation layer, which would be fine, but all the other markers I did are on the text layer, so I'm just going to change it to text. And also if you want to change the callout sign, the callout head, then you can do that here, and of course you can replace the icon to something else, but we're not doing that now, so just hit OK and OK. And now it's time to actually create the callout. So what we do is that we click on callout and we use a rectangle. You can use a polygon as well, but now we are going to look for like a square or rectangle shape. So let's just click on it. And let's just extract this part over here. So click, drag the mouse, click again, and then click where you want the callout head to be positioned. And then the callout is created here and also on this isolated view over here. So you can see that this part is actually extracted from the original drawing. Again, if you want to reorganize your drawing plane, if you want to make sure that everything is kept in its right place, you just click on the magnify window and then you have the callout here and the original drawing over there. Now, The strong point of the callout is that if you do any kind of modification on the original drawing, then the callout will update, and this is what we are investigating now. The change which we want to implement on our drawing and want to see in the callout to be realized is the addition of another layer to the slab. Because this project is pretty conceptual, but we are going to detail it now, and what we want to see is this single layer slab to be broken down into 2 layers, and we want to make sure that the callout reflects the nice merging and meeting of the layers. So for that, first we have to create a second layer for this slab. So what we do is that we create the slab. Don't forget that this is not a drawing, this is the model itself. So you can just click on the element you want to work with, and it's going to be selected. And we go to this pencil icon to have access to the properties of this slab. So if you want to add an additional slab layer, we go to slab layers, and here we have that single one layer that we have, and by clicking on the plus icon you can give another layer to the slab. But this is going to be too thick, altogether 600 millimeters, that's too much. So the top layer would be decreased to just 100 millimeter, and if you click, then the changes will be updated, and the bottom layer is going to be just 200 millimeters. Now, the next thing you have to change is the material for the slabs, because if you have both slab layers having the same materials, then on the detail, you wouldn't see any difference in the hatch pattern. So let's go to the top layer and give it another material. Just click on the material itself, and then you have access to the library. You either look for something in the in-model library, or you can go to materials. We are looking for a prefabricated concrete now, and we start typing in the name, and then we just click on the element we want. That's fine, and the material is now replaced. But that's not quite enough, because even though in the 3D preview I see that the material is changed to another texture, I'm not certain that the hatch pattern would be what I'm looking for. So let's click back on the material, and while we have the material selected, let's click on the cogwheel and go back to edit material. We talked about this before. If you want to change how the hatch pattern looks like for a certain texture, you have to go to hatch on section, and here you can change the texture to something else. Now, instead of using plain concrete, we are going to look for a concrete ISO pattern. Let's hit OK. The orientation, the angle is 45 degrees, that's fine, but the spacing and dash length is not okay, so I'm just going to increase this to 300 millimeters and 300 millimeters, and hit OK, and OK again, and now we are done with setting up the material and the both layers, so let's just hit OK, OK again. Now, what is happening on the section? I don't see any hatches. This is because in certain cases, updating the 3D and the sections is transactional, so you have to manually click on the 3D hammer in order to update these changes. Why is that so? This is because sometimes you don't want all changes to be reflected. If you would have it automatically refreshed all the time, then that might be a bit time consuming on your processor, so in these cases you have to do this kind of exercise manually. But that's okay, you just click on the 3D hammer, and then the section would update, and then you would see both layers with the correct hatch patterns, with some issue over here. So if you add an additional layer to a slab, the additional layer has no idea that it has to inherit the cutout, the recess over the staircase. So you have to amend that manually. You might have to do that. So how do we do that? We click on the floor plan, and we try to find the slab on the first floor. Now, the way you can do that is that you click where you think the slab would be, and then you have this kind of pre-selector. You have two things on top of each other. You have a wall, and below that you have a slab, so the software doesn't know which one you're looking for. So it gives you the option, this drop-down menu, to help you find the right content, or just use this back and forth arrows to find the slab that you're looking for. And once you have the slab selected, you can just go in this local menu and add a hole which is just above the staircase. So what you do is that you click, and you just drag the staircase just the way you did before. And when you do that, you just hit enter, and then the hole will be created, which you don't see yet. But if you go back to this section and you update the 3D again, then you see that the hole above the staircase is now amended, so it's created properly, and we have both layers. But there's one issue over here. We don't have the walls meeting with the structural layer, so they stop too early and we want them to cut into the structural layer. Question is, how do we do that? The correct behavior would be that these walls would cut into the top layer and would go and meet with the structural layer over this one. So to put it simply, I want this wall to go down 100 millimeter. Now, you could do this manually, you could do this with 2D editing tools, but luckily in ARCHLine there's a purpose-built tool for that, which would allow you to set up the layer interaction any way you want. Let's see what that means. If I select any of the walls over here and go to the pencil icon, I go to compound walls and I see that I can set up where the walls start and where they go to. And I have all kinds of acronyms over here. Let's investigate what they actually mean. If I go to the drop-down menu and hit edit, I see that there's this kind of diagram to show me what the acronyms mean. TS means top of structure, so that would be the structural layer. That's actually fine. This is what we want. We want the wall to start from a structural layer and go all the way up. So this value is okay, and the height should be bottom of structure, which would be here. So actually this wall is set up the way it should be. But why is it still not starting from the structural layer? Well, this is because the software doesn't have the same setting for the structural layer's height than we want. But we can compensate for that. So let's see how that's done. If I select the floor plan, put that into focus, and we are on the first floor, we go to the floor manager, select the first floor, and here we have the same diagram. We have some values over here, and this is actually where you can set up where these values actually are. So if you want to tell the software that the bottom of structure, top of structure should be on this particular level, this is where you can do that. Right off the bat, there's a mistake over here. Mistake for us. It wouldn't be a mistake if we would have more layers, but in this case, we don't have a floor finish. So we don't have that 50 millimeters extra. So we are going to zero that out. And the next thing is what we have to do is that we have to tell where the top of structure is. So we have to move it downwards, and then the wall would go and meet it. So if we say that this top of structure is 100 millimeter lower, then all the walls on my model are going to start 100 millimeter lower. So because they are tied to the top of structure. So what we do is we are going to type in a minus 100, and the bottom of structure is actually good as it is. So let's hit OK. And the software thinks for a second because it has to recalculate the meeting of the layers. And let's go back to the section and see what we have done. Okay, we are getting there. We see that the walls are now starting from minus 100. That's fine. But the slab went down as well, and we don't want that. So now the whole slab, even though it's defined to the right rules, it just went downwards. We have to compensate for that, and when we do, then the interaction would be perfect. So what we do is that we click on the slab, we go to the pencil icon, and we are going to look at this base offset from the floor. Now it's minus 100. Of course, you can type in 0, hit enter, and then it would be done. The slab would go up and it would meet with the walls correctly. So you can type in values all you want, but we could use the same kind of binding regulations. We go to edit, and we are going to say that the reference point for the slab is not going to be top of structure, but instead it's going to be finished floor, which is the 0 value we have defined. So let's hit OK, let's hit OK again, and then the slab goes back to its place. We have to rebuild the 3D again to make sure that it's actually at the right place. And then we see that all the interactions are okay. So here we have the interaction just fine, and here we have another one. Last thing we have to do, we have to make sure that these changes are reflected on the callout, because on the callout we still only have one layer, so this is not the end result. The end result would be nice 2-layer structure with the floor, with the slabs and the walls meeting with each other the right way. So it's simple to do it. You just go to the local menu of the callout and you just have to say that you want to update. Well, you can update this one, or you can update all the callouts. I'm going to update now this one because that's the only one I have. And now I have an updated drawing of the original version. So I now see a very nice interaction of layers, which I'm going to use for further editing. So just to sum up this exercise what we did in the last few minutes, you can create callouts to extract information on your floor plan or section. And the good thing about callouts is that if you do any kind of modifications, they are going to update. Another thing we talked about briefly is how to add additional layers to structures and how to make sure that the structural layers and the finished layers would meet accordingly. Let's move on.